Guys, welcome back to the channel. So recently there's a lot of urban farming going on. Now I'll give you a quick example. My dad lives in the city. He has a home in the city. That's the capital city of Uganda, which is Kampala. And he has a place where he does have a house, which is actually smaller than a plot of 50 by 100 feet. It's certainly much smaller than that. But in addition to having his home there, he keeps chickens. Can you imagine how many? 200 layer chickens he keeps. That's right in the city with neighbors, yeah? And then you'll find that he has a neighbor just next to him who keeps 1,000 chickens. Now, this one is a bit on probably a bigger plot. The structure takes up the entire land. But in addition to that, like this guy who has his 1,000 birds has like neighbors of like houses this side, this side, this side. In fact, in a very small area of about maybe half an acre or so, there's like 4 poultry farmers where my dad is located. Crazy, I know, yeah? And it's something that's becoming quite trendy. It's something that I have seen. I don't know if it's because people prefer to farm in the towns or the urban areas are coming into the places where the farms are. For example, where I am right now is what you'd call more of a rural setting, yeah? But 5-10 years back, it was even more rural than it is right now. So now the people, keep building closer and closer. So it's probable that whilst right now my farm is located in what you'd call a rural setting, in maybe 5 or 10 years, it will be in an urban setting, and then they'll call my farm an urban farm, yeah? But what I want us to talk about is urban farms versus rural farms. What makes more sense, yeah? If you want to start a farm outside there, does it make sense that, you do something small, maybe in a more urban setting? A lot of people have this idea that if you do a farm in an urban setting, you're going to make more money for your bucks because, there is a lot of people or the cost for the product is much higher in an urban setting, yeah? And in addition to that, they are thinking about the fact that, the demand is much higher, the people do have money in urban settings. So, it just makes more sense that if I do my farm in an urban setting, I'll make more money. But what are the cons? What are the pros of having an urban farm versus a rural farm? What are the differences and what are the advantages? And what's my advice to you if you want to start a farm and you're really trying to consider it? A lot of times the reasons people are considering it is they're thinking to themselves, should I move and go and live in a more rural area? I have children who I have to take to school and things like that. I'm also going to be telling you based on my personal situation and my personal position, what I think is best, yeah? Or should I, just do my farming in an urban setting? So stick around right through to the very end. So first of all, urban farming is usually farming that's done on small plots of land in a very urban setting. And a lot of times they use a bit more, I would say more sophisticated methods to try and get as much productivity as possible out of a small piece of land, whether they are doing crops or whether they are doing animals, yeah? While the rural setting is the more traditional kind of farming, yeah? So in the rural type of farming, it's the way we've always done it in a long time, where a while back someone has a large piece of land and they decide to place their farm there. And a lot of times they're going to, use the old style systems of mechanisms. Of course, with time and, with the development and technology that's coming, a lot of them are changing into using like tractors, using drones to fumigate and things like that. But the biggest percentage of people, the biggest number of people actually don't do it that way. I think more than like 50% of the world actually farm the traditional way, yeah? So what are the main differences and where are the advantages when it does come to, the different settings, when it does come to the farming? And again, for a lot of these things, I'm going to be using myself as an example. The first advantage that comes to urban setting is, proximity to the business owner or the farm owner. Now, most people live in urban areas. Yeah, the biggest percentage of every population in every country lives in urban areas. Very few people live in rural areas. Why? Of course, because of things like schools. If you have children, you want to take your children to the best schools. Most best schools are in urban settings. Services, all the different kinds of services, whether it's hospitals or, everything else you'd want, it's easier to get in a more urban setting compared to a more rural setting. So because of that, most people live in an urban setting. Now, when people do live in an urban setting, it means that also jobs are more present, they are more prevalent in urban settings. Now, if someone does have a job in an urban setting, it's going to be very difficult for them to move, even if they want to start a business, which is a farm. It's going to be very difficult for them to move quite a distance away from their business in order to pursue a farm. Very, very difficult. So like I've told you, like my dad, he has a small plot of land in the city and he decided to, do his farm right there. 200 chickens. And that 200 chickens is going to bring him some money. you know, a substantial amount of money every month or something like that, yeah? So a lot of people prefer to start with a farm in, you know, an urban setting. So because of proximity, if you're the kind of person who is going to have difficulties traveling to a more rural setting, to further away distances, then doing an urban kind of farm is certainly much better. But the biggest problem when it does come to that is that there's always a limitation in terms of land, yeah? You could try and do it as best possible as you can to save up as much land as possible. So if you're growing crops, you might decide to grow them in a vertical format. I don't know if you guys have seen vertical farming, yeah? You know, you grow them in a vertical format where instead of growing them horizontally along, you know, distance, you grow them going in the air. So you might use, you know, maybe containers and things like that, and you place them higher and higher, and, you know, you just utilize as much space up as possible. And it might work, but it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, at a particular point, you're going to be constrained by land, especially if you want to grow and get really big. My dad, for example, he has his 200 chickens. He can try and expand depending on the system he decides to use, but he can never get to 10,000 chickens like I am right here. That's going to be the biggest constraint. Now, the other thing about, you know, the limitations in having to move away from your work and things like that is just doing it like I do it, honestly, yeah? Now, I personally actually do have a home in the city, because I also do have children who also do need to go to school, and because of that, I don't bring them to this rural setting. Now, every holiday, every time the children take holidays from school, they spend it right here on the farm with me, trying to learn as much as possible about farming so that, you know, they understand how to set up and how to run the businesses. But in most circumstances, they're actually going to be, you know, in the city, yeah? So then what do? I personally try to divide my time between spending time at home and spending time on the farm, yeah? Now, initially, when I was setting up the farm, I actually dedicated a lot of time to be present on the farm so that, you know, the farm can set up, I understand all the systems and everything that's starting out, so that later on, I can spend time away, yeah? So initially, I would spend like 4 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, over a month, 1.5, 2 months on the farm without stepping off. I had to sacrifice family, I had to sacrifice home. But after I set it up and got all the systems going, I got people to get in charge and, you know, to be in charge of everything. I got a farm manager who is really good at what he's doing. And then just like that, now I can spend much more time away from the farm, yeah? So again, urban farming is really great in terms of proximity. It is great for starting out. But in order to scale and grow, you're going to have to go into a more rural area, and you might practice the urban style of farming, but in a more rural area to be able to scale, yeah? That's number one. Now, the other thing is efficiency, yeah? Now, it can't be doubted that urban farming is 100% more efficient in terms of getting results vis-a-vis the effort that you put in compared to most people who do farming in rural settings. So in urban farms, you're going to find someone doing, you know, farming on a really, really small space, yeah? Very, very small space. And farmers who do things on small spaces, like I said, usually have to be a bit more creative with the way they do everything. People who do urban farming, number one, save more water. Yeah, they save more water. Quite crazy to think about it because I'm in a tropical country. I'm in Uganda, which is a tropical country. We have a lot of rainfall every year. We have a lot of water bodies. We have rivers, we have lakes. I personally do have a borehole on the farm, and a lot of times we actually do have water. Yeah, almost all the water around in my country is fresh water. But it's quite interesting that water is actually a scarce commodity. That's something I know. It's a very scarce commodity in many parts of the world. And you know, a lot of times I watch documentaries maybe about Saudi Arabia or countries like that, and they're saying these countries are facing a shortage of water. Forget about water for drinking, yeah? I mean, that's a problem over here in my country because maybe a more political reason, not really because we don't have water. No, we do have a lot of water, but you know, trying to make it safe for drinking is an issue. But these countries don't have water for irrigation, for growing crops, you know, for all those things. And they're trying to figure out ways of getting water to come up, or, you know, harvesting salty water from the sea and, you know, taking all the salt out so that they can utilize it for irrigation or things like that. That's not a problem for us right here. But urban farms actually utilize less water, and since they utilize less water, and water is a rare commodity, it's becoming more and more rare with time, especially with the global warming, which also is created on a bigger impact by rural farms, yeah? So, I mean, when it does come to global warming, or the global warming phenomenon, you're thinking about things like cutting trees. So it's going to be in the more rural types of farms where you find people cutting trees, slashing places so that, you know, they can have a lot of land to grow crops. It's going to be in the more rural settings where you have farms that emit a lot of greenhouse gases. That's either through the tractors that are plowing the land and things like that, or through animals, yeah, maybe chickens like me. These chickens, their dung or their droppings that they produce have a lot of ammonia, sulfur, and things like that. And those are greenhouse gases. Maybe it's cattle, maybe it's goat and sheep. All those kinds of farming produce a lot of greenhouse gases, yeah. So in terms of the general efficiency and also safety for the environment, urban farms are 100% better than the more traditional types of farms. When it does come to, you know, the whole thing of the environment, you can try and be better when it does come to the rural farms, yeah, by using, you know, better tractors. I don't know if they're electric tractors, honestly, I don't know. I don't think I've seen an electric tractor. I think they might be there, but I haven't seen them. Most of the tractors are, you know, the gold oil type tractors that produce a lot of smoke, a lot of carbon monoxide going into the atmosphere and just polluting the atmosphere. Because of course they need to use a lot of strength and a lot of power to do the work, yeah? But that's one of the disadvantages of having a more rural type of farm. A major difference, number 3, is going to be in terms of the workforce that has to be utilized, yeah? So in the more urban settings, generally because the farms are more efficient, you're going to have less workforce, so less human labor being utilized. That has its advantages and disadvantages. The main advantage is that, of course, the farmer themselves is going to spend less, yeah? They're certainly going to spend much less. That's number 1. Number 2, it's going to force the urban farmers to become more creative, yeah? Because you have small space, you know, having to utilize less people is going to lead to a lot of creativity, you know, development in terms of the agriculture space, because you're trying to utilize as little effort, as little space, as little labor as possible to get as much output as possible. So that stimulates a lot of creativity, a lot of systems that actually come up that can then be utilized even on the more rural setting, yeah? Now the disadvantage, which is actually an advantage for the rural type of farming, which requires more labor, is that it provides more employment to people around. That is the honest truth, yeah? So for me, for example, I have quite a number of people working on the farm, so I can employ way more people working around. Of course, I'm certainly going to be paying more people, so it's going to be a bit more expensive, but generally for the growth of the people and the growth of the community, it's something that's better, yeah? So in the end, finally, if you want to sit down and decide and think to yourself, which of the two should you be doing? Should you be doing the more rural type or the more urban type? Honestly, I'll be honest with you, I personally believe more in the more rural setting, not the urban style of farming. Because like I've said, you have a restriction, and that biggest restriction is going to be land, yeah? How big you can get and how big your project can get, yeah? And in addition to that, of course, you're going to cause a lot of disruptions for people in terms of like noise, or sometimes it's pollution, or things like that, yeah? You're going to have a lot of restrictions, yeah? Of course, a lot of people still do believe that the products are much more expensive, there's much more ready market in the urban settings compared to the more rural settings. There's a lot of wrong information when it does come to that, yeah? A lot of wrong information. Because for me, for example, with poultry and my eggs, I sell my eggs at a much higher price right here compared to a lot of farmers that I do know in the urban settings. Why? Because they are so concentrated in the urban settings and there's very few people in the more rural settings. And I mean, for that plays on my side. Yeah, it's an advantage to me on my side, because then I get to, you know, make the money, keep money to myself. Everything just turns out being more profitable, yeah? Now, there are some other products, if it's like vegetables, certainly going to be much more expensive in urban settings. Actually, it even makes way more sense for you to do vegetables in an urban setting, because first of all, the cost of transporting them, since they don't stay for so long, they just get spoiled if you keep them on for a very long time. But in an urban setting, it makes more sense, and also they are way more expensive in urban settings compared to rural settings, yeah? So you have to consider what products exactly you're going to be getting out of the farm, what you're going to be selling, who you're going to be selling it to, for you to understand where you want to place yourself. But in most circumstances, a more traditional farm is going to be way more beneficial. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, smash the notification bell. Catch you very soon with another video. Lots of love. Bye-bye.